Hello and welcome to Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. My name is Ben and with me as always is...
Jim.
Or as I like to call him, aspiring priest David.
Oh, that character? That's the one?
He's got a lot of moxie, he's just a little nervous.
Okay, of all the characters in this, actually, you know what? There's several
You know what?
worse
It's pretty good.
That is pretty good. There are several worse characters that you could have selected for me on this day. But look, so we watched The Fifth Element, but before we get into all of that, I just wanted to take a moment to mention that you may have noticed that we've been a little bit more active on places like YouTube Shorts, TikTok, and Instagram Reels. So if you found your way here after looking at one of our short form content bits and pieces on one of those platforms, then thanks for coming along. You've reached our long podcast where we're going to talk today about The Fifth Element, and we have a lot to say. So before we get right into that, Ben, take it away with a synopsis of The Fifth Element.
Just in case you haven't watched the film and found us, here's what it's about. The Fifth Element is set in a futuristic world. Our main character is a cab driver named Corbin Dallas, one of the coolest names ever, who inadvertently becomes the hero when a mysterious woman named Lilu, the embodiment of the mysterious Fifth Element, falls into his life. As an ancient evil threatens Earth, Corbin teams up with Lilu and a quirky priest, Father Vito Cornelius, to discover the 4 elemental stones needed to combat the menace. With a blend of action, humor, and romance, the film explores themes of love, sacrifice, and as they race against time to save humanity from maybe its inevitable destruction. The Fifth Element.
Yeah. Look, just hit us with some facts because I got some thoughts.
There's only good thoughts about this movie. Released in 1997, directed by Luc Besson, of Leon the Professional, Lucy, Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, and Arthur and the Minimoys, and its several sequels. A screenplay by Luc Besson and Robert Mark Kamen, starring Bruce Willis, Gary Oldman, Ian Holm, Chris Tucker, and Mila Jovovich. Those two.
Actually, you got it right the first time. I've heard her actually say it, and I was like, he got it right. He got the pronunciation right. And then you second guessed it, you walked it back, and now I don't know where we are.
It's that soft J.
Yeah.
Budget of $90 million, box office return $263.9 million. This was really popular when it was released. And yeah, let's dive into it. So I'm sensing some vibes from you, Jim, about this movie. What are your vibes?
Look, it's unusual for me because usually the person with the strong opinions is you. And what is really interesting about this one is when you said, and obviously we have video and audio evidence of you saying, hey, we're going to look at The Fifth Element, and me being excited about that. You know, we have that. That happened. That's history. I was pumped. I was actually so pumped that even when you said you can find it on this platform and that platform and the other platform, I actually said to myself, Fifth Element, man. Gee, I haven't seen that for a long time and I really like that movie. I'm going to buy it. So that's what I did, okay? I actually went on, not iTunes anymore. That's not how they do it. The TV app, the Apple TV app. And I purchased The Fifth Element. And then I sat down, you know, you can imagine me with popcorn if it makes it easier, even though I didn't actually have popcorn. And I watched The Fifth Element, got to the end, and I went, I don't think I like this movie. And I'm looking at it going, well, I own it now. So
that's a forever choice.
Yeah, it's not, but still, like, you know, if you know how those, you know, when those so-called purchases work off the Apple store there, they're not forever choices, but it does feel that way. And look, honestly, obviously you can see that I was pumped for the film. It had been a long time. I thought I knew what it was. And then when we watched it, there were so many things that I had completely forgotten about the movie. And a lot of them, let's put it this way, didn't age well. Ben, you know, it's no longer 1997. And honestly, I was reflecting on the world at the time and I was like, I don't think half of this stuff would have been okay in 97 anyway, even though
this movie crushed in 97.
Well, it may have in terms of its, you know, box office appeal. But again, I'm like, it wasn't that long ago. So I really just sort of felt that I understand why I perhaps have fond memories of the movie and why other people really like the movie, but ultimately, there are a lot of things that are quite difficult to take in The Fifth Element. Like, would you agree, or do you think I'm sort of.
For sure. And the different approach was I knew what I was getting into. I actually remembered this movie really well. Like, there's no getting around it. There's quite misogynistic themes. There's quite exploitative themes throughout the film. There's very kind of inappropriate, off color jokes and commentaries on different parts of society. And they're there. And they're wrong and they're not okay in today's day and age. But this movie, after I finished watching it, my thought was it's kind of like sci-fi Die Hard at the end. And I like the mix of hard sci-fi and soft sci-fi, and I like the mix of mysticism. I think this is Bruce Willis at his peak, like, or very close to his peak. And it's a movie of ideas, and some of those ideas don't work, some of those ideas don't connect. But it's a movie of like sci-fi ideas, and I did enjoy it again
I
with the
should
recognition
say,
of what it is.
and look, we can certainly start with the things that I liked, because I
Yeah.
certainly wouldn't say that there's nothing to like here. There's stuff that I did remember fondly the first time, and it's really the stuff that I think still holds up again. Of course, the visuals. If we're going to talk about The Fifth Element, you've got to talk about the visuals. Now, the visuals, I don't really mean the visual effects, although there are plenty of those in the movie. I more mean the visual sensibilities of the film. Honestly, The Fifth Element, and it's perhaps that French influence, right? But The Fifth Element really does feel a lot like a Terry Gilliam style production design when you look at the costumes, when you look at the characters, when you look at the world that they have actually created for those characters to inhabit. It's a very strange kind of world. It's got things about it that are off-putting. It's got strange creatures. It's, something that is certainly a visual feast, and it's probably the area of the film that has certainly had a lot of love poured into it. Is the idea that we're just world building here, and we're building something that is not straightforward, and it is a little left of center, and it is a little bit strange.
It leans on that kind of French absurdism, that abstractism. Like, it very much is like, hey, like, this is what you expect sci-fi to look at, but look at it through this lens. Look at it, what it looks like here. Look at it being shiny with the dirty undercurrent. Look at it with the broken down world around it. Look at the aliens that we have. Like, they don't go for this typical, at least to start with, the typical aliens you'd expect of like an all-powerful race of benefactors would be. And then later on, you get like the opera singers and the evil aliens and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's got a very distinct and very confident look.
And I think that's one of the strengths of the movie, and that's certainly the thing that I remembered about the film. And that is really the whole way through the movie. The other thing that I really liked is one particular sequence, and that is the taxi cab car chase
Yeah.
through the not streets but the skies of the cityscape. And that is, I think, a really great sequence. Now, it's a sequence that, if you look at it by modern standards, we've seen this many times before, but here in 1997, this was one of the first kind of actual action sequences with this kind of thing. We had seen some visuals like this in films like Blade Runner earlier on, but they were fairly limited in what they could actually do from sort of an action standpoint. And because technology had progressed, this was kind of the first time we saw real action being done in this sort of elevated way, with the cars being flying cars and things like that. And even Back to the Future, again, it could show us glimpses. Back to the Future 2 is what I'm talking about there. It could show us glimpses of this kind of flying car world, but here we're kind of really immersed and really giving it a bit of an action sensibility. And I remembered that sequence as being great. And I look at it now and I think it's still pretty great. It's still pretty fun, And this is obviously pre George Lucas going to Coruscant,
Yeah.
in a big way. I think the special editions where we saw Coruscant for the first time was actually that year, 1997. And even then, it was only a couple of shots. So still very early in that kind of aesthetic. And obviously, since that time, we've seen this kind of sequence so many times. But,
Well, I
it was.
instantly thought of a movie we've watched in Total Recall, the remake. The car chase, the levitation, the magnetic, the flying, like it was like, reminded me of it. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is how we've come along.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's something to sort of celebrate there. It's probably, in my opinion, the strongest action sequence of the film as well. The rest of it is largely gunplay where, it's a little bit of a mixed bag in the sense of how it's choreographed and how it actually looks in the final form. But what are the things that you love about it?
There's a goofy sensibility in this film. And I mean that in the most pure form possible. The way certain characters react like cartoons and behave like cartoons, I find immensely enjoyable. There are some performances I do really enjoy. I actually really like Ian Holm in this movie. Like, he's kind of this ball of nervous energy. He's like supposed to be this expert. He's supposed to be the wizard in the hero's journey. And the wizard doesn't know much. And he knows the end point and the start point, but he knows nothing in the middle. And even when we get to the end, he doesn't know how to instigate the end. And I kind of like his vibe. I really forgot how much the stories weave in this movie. So, like, there are like plot A, B, C, D. They're all kind of going towards the same point, but they all take different paths and they cross over briefly at points and things like this. And like I mentioned in the previous podcast when I was introing The Fifth Element, the protagonist never crosses paths with the antagonist in this film. They don't know each other exists, except for the fact that they want to steal his ticket to get on the ship. That's all they know. They don't know he's going to try and thwart them. They don't know anything about that. And it's kind of a weird concept for a mainstream movie. Like, that kind of like, there's all these people acting on the same piece of information who either don't interact or interact very briefly or don't even know that each other are doing the same thing. And I actually found that really interesting as far as a storytelling device.
And I think I probably would have been more on board for that if the rest of what we were seeing from a story perspective wasn't so generic, in the
Yeah,
sense that we've really got this very thin kind of idea of there's a nameless, vague evil the size of a planet. It's on the way to do something bad. Let's grab, a MacGuffin of a character who is the fifth element to functionally just a plot device to then stop the nameless evil that is sort of coming through. And look, to be honest, the evil may not be nameless. I don't pretend that I, necessarily listened for every alien race name in this movie. So I'm saying a nameless evil. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it has some sort of name, but
well, there's the big metal ducks, the bald dogs, the blue lady. Like, they're really clear aliens in this movie, Jim. You should get it.
yeah, and that is really, I'm glad that you say that because that's how I refer to them. I quite liked the giant metal steampunk-esque ducks in the movie, particularly towards the start. I was like, that's cool and weird, and I don't know what I'm looking at, but I do like it. I thought it was a very interesting kind of
Yeah.
race. I also thought that, particularly for 97, I'm going to say the mercenary alien race was really fun, and their face pieces were incredibly expressive with what looked like a lot of animatronics sort of happening, or with sort of radio control, I'm guessing, behind those
It would
masks
have
to
had to have been,
actually
right?
make them articulate. And I thought that they were actually really well done and really fun as a character subset. So I've sort of said all these things and I've like, okay, so I did like a lot. It's just that, what am I really here for? I'm here for story and I'm here for character. And as I've sort of said, the story feels fairly sort of generic in the sense that, yeah, we've got an evil thing, we've got a plot point that is also a character who is going to destroy the evil thing. And then we're trying to sort of race around and get from A to B to collect, some stones and stop the evil. And I looked at that, and while there are many movies, some of them on this very podcast that we've talked about, where it has a plot that's exactly that thin, and I still say I loved it, I couldn't really get on board or start to feel for these characters. And I think ultimately it's because I did not buy for 1 second the romance in this film between the two leads. And the film is sort of built around their connection. And the fact that I didn't buy into their connection really made it difficult for me to care, I suppose, about all of the characters and what they were doing. I do think Ian Holm is strong, as you said. So I was enjoying myself when he was on the screen. But ultimately, it's also just something where you look at it and you go, there is a huge age difference between Bruce Willis and Mila Jovovich in this
She's
movie.
actually an ageless being.
Sure, but here's a fact for you, okay?
No, don't.
But just think about this. In 1998, a mere year after this movie, we watched Bruce Willis have a daughter in Armageddon who is played by Liv Tyler, right? Now, Liv Tyler is 2 years, younger than Mila Jovovich, who is Bruce Willis's romantic love interest in this film, The Fifth Element, okay? So the romantic connection between the two just actually feels ick. I think also it's compounded by the fact that there are some movie stars out there who play regularly younger than their age. Tom Cruise, he seemed to be able to play about, mid 30s until he was nearly late 50s. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Bruce Willis has a great, rugged, adventure action
always
hero
looked old.
look, but he's always looked old. So it really doesn't help that dynamic that he can't play to a younger age. And it really just makes that extreme age difference between the two feel even more pronounced, which again, you're building this whole movie around the love story because the actual plot is fairly thin. And then you have this love story where every time they refer to it, I'm just like, oh, I don't know how to feel about that. Do you know what I mean? So,
Well, thanks for making this movie worse for me, Jim. There's a character we've not mentioned, and they're problematic in their own right, but they are the loudest part of this movie, and that is Chris Tucker's Ruby Rod. And I think this, at least at a minimum, launched him. Because this was the first where, he was always, he'd done about 5 movies before this, littler movies. He's always that loudmouth. But this was that kind of extreme that we would get in things like Rush Hour afterwards and things like that, to the turn it up to 11, the Spinal Tap. And this character, regardless of you like them or not, when they're on the screen, they're the only thing you're looking at. They're the only thing you're paying attention to, because it's just a commanding kind of this loud, braggadocious, over the top kind of almost an expletive of a character, is the only way I could put it.
And I would say to that, I don't like the character, but I do appreciate the performance.
I can get that. Yeah.
It's a sense where I sort of say, I understand what this character is, and I understand why perhaps the creatives think that this character is funny. I don't particularly think that the character is funny, but I do really appreciate the absolute, nuttiness of the performance that, Chris Tucker is giving in that role. And it really is such a bold performance and something that could have gone terribly wrong. So there's a lot of real, bravado on the part of the actor, and also must have been trust in the production to actually pull that off in the way that it actually eventually did. And I think you're right, absolutely, because really we had this, which was 97, and I'm pretty sure Rush Hour was 98. So for Chris Tucker, that's a 1-2 punch of very successful movies back to back, which sort of helped to solidify him in that space.
Well, Ruby Rod, I think, is at their best when they're not in an environment they're comfortable with. That's where you see that kind of that Rush Hour, that Chris Tucker, he's crawling around, he's hiding from the enemies, he's accidentally hurting people. That's when that character to me was the most enjoyable. When it's kind of loud and yelling and the radio host, agreed, not as enjoyable. A really interesting performance to watch in this movie, because even within this movie, it is a departure of vibe Like it is this kind of really pushing of this kind of this extreme nature of this world they've created. And I think that's part of the vision of this film in a strange way. Like it's very, very French, very, it's very like, we don't care what your sensibilities are, these are ours, and you must watch them. Like it's like kind of like, whoa.
That's true in a way, but it also has an interesting conundrum with that approach as well, because this actually reminds me of, what the what some Italian filmmakers were doing in like the 60s and 70s, in the sense that we had that idea of what they called a spaghetti western, which was a western that was designed to mimic or mirror the American westerns that were very popular at the time, but they were created, produced, and shot in Italy and their surrounds. So it was this sort of idea that you are from a different culture and you are deliberately trying to imitate, mimic, pay homage to the sort of more mainstream American culture. And there's a lot of, and I'm not actually saying that that's a bad thing. I think it's really interesting. This is kind of the French version of that. It was a French production, but it very much attempting to play to the American market, and trying to play into the American action adventure sort of science fiction sensibilities as well. And it's where you get that really unique French flavor, but kind of stamped onto this very commercial Americanized sort of product. And that is sort of like, yeah, you can say that it's French and that's how we do things, but also you're trying to play to this very sort of commercial market, which puts you in a very interesting spot when you actually look at the film as a whole. And perhaps it was that offbeat mixture of the two worlds, which is actually what led to its initial success at that time. So who's to say? But
Well, I don't think people like, you're right in your criticisms about story and character. Like without the dressing that is the fifth element, they're very boring. But I think maybe that's what captured people, was this was a vibe in a movie. This was a feeling in a movie that they hadn't seen the combination of before. It was it was a movie they were used to seeing. They'd seen sci-fi, they'd seen action, they'd seen Bruce Willis, they'd seen all these things, and then it was just twisted, and this really kind of shiny, pretty, quirky, absurdist coat was put on top of it. Because the other thing about this movie is it plays itself as a comedy. It misses a lot, but it plays itself as a comedy, almost a comedy of errors, like very kind of like old English Faustian, like the maid tripped and the thing tripped. Like that's all in this movie, and it's reflected in them trying to get tickets, and then the next guy trying to get tickets, and the next guy. It's kind of like that Shakespearean confusion without the deft touch of Shakespeare. Don't get me wrong, but it's very much trying to play into that fast, that kind of that comedic fast, and yeah, it's. I think people just hadn't seen it before, hadn't seen that combination of elements,
and I think
those
it's
fifth
definite.
elements.
Yeah, I think definitely that word that you used, combination, is probably responsible for its success. It's a combination of, action sequences like the cab in the city streets. It's the combination of the unusual production design and costume design. It's the combination of the boldness with which it is all put together. It's a combination of the fact that you have Bruce Willis, who was very, very bankable in the 90s, as your lead. And
Huge.
it is the combination of the fact that it was going for edgy. And I say going for because I don't believe that it really lands. But again, we must say, this is my personal opinion, it was successful at the time. So edgy in 1997 perhaps becomes off-putting in the modern times. So, and that's, neither here nor there. That's just how I read the film. So the fact is, this film was successful. People do love this film. And even I like a lot of elements of the film. Ah, there it is again. Bing, bing, element. But there are just those sort of fundamentals and more things I found to be off-putting and to be, a little bit, do we have to do that, sort of thing when we actually viewed it again, that I didn't recall the first time. Can I also just say, we live in Australia. The Australian Ratings Classification Board missed on this one.
Yeah, they
Okay.
did. Very much.
Somehow this film secured a PG rating.
That's insane.
There is absolutely no way that this film should be rated PG in our country, and it is just absurd that it still retains that rating. The amount of innuendo, the violence, if we were to talk about it, this is not in any way, shape, or form a PG movie, and yet there it is, stamped right onto the film. It's PG. Parental guidance,
I
guys.
could line up 10 movies easily that have a higher rating than this that are softer. Like
Yeah.
without even struggling. Like you're very much right. It's very wrong. And I don't know, in the 90s there was still, I don't know if there's still codification going on or still
No, it was
flexibility going on.
look, the Australian Ratings Board and that system and how it works is fascinating. We don't necessarily have to get into it here, but it's not surprising that occasionally you have misses. It's functionally a rotating board of people that changes and is sort of re-elected from a new group after
It's
you
fixed
meet.
term, isn't it? You can only do it for so long.
That's right. So
Yeah.
it was obviously when you have a group that comes in at a certain time, you can actually get a wave of movies that later on you go, whoa, what? So
Yeah.
whatever was going on in 1997 with that particular, mixture of people who are up on that board, felt that PG was appropriate for this particular film.
Wrong.
And in my personal opinion, it was not appropriate for this particular
Factually.
film.
No opinion on Ben's side. Factually wrong.
So, look, I think I've basically gone through what I liked about the movie and what I disliked about the movie, but kudos to the movie. It was successful. People love this thing. I can see why. It's just perhaps not ultimately something that I love when we revisit it now, but I'm glad we did revisit it.
Here's the thing. I actually think last week's podcast and this week's podcast, we've flipped. We both recognized the elements of the film. We both calculated it kind of the same, but we both kind of just ended up on different sides of that kind of liked it, didn't like it. Like last week, I was looking at the film going, I get it. It's a good movie. It's well made. It's well acted. I don't like this movie. And you're like, I get why people like this movie this week. I get all the parts and things. I just don't like it anymore. Again, I'm on the flip of that. This movie to me, because it's not story dependent, we haven't even mentioned Gary Oldman. Such a weird character in this movie. Such a superfluous character in this movie. He's the main villain, and he does not need to exist.
No, it's look, I'm always there for Gary Oldman. I'm always happy to see him on the screen, and particularly when he's got something as outrageous as this to do with whatever was going on with his headpiece, hairpiece, craziness. And of course, he's decided to go with, or been instructed to go with, this very over-the-top accent to complement it. So it's fun to watch, but again, it is another piece of real irrelevance in the movie when you put it all together.
Well, I enjoyed The Fifth Element. Jim did not enjoy The Fifth Element. We have a chance next week to have a movie that we'll both enjoy, and it's all up to Jim.
I think you are going to enjoy this pick for next week.
Excited.
Because I have been wanting to look at this movie for a while. I think that it's going to annoy you initially because of a sequencing thing where you don't like it when I go out of order in this way. But at the end of the day,
You've picked a sequel?
I might have picked a sequel before we've actually viewed the original on this particular podcast.
You are correct. I am initially annoyed.
But let me tell you what the sequel is, and maybe that will turn that frown upside down. We are going to watch Steven Spielberg's The Lost World: Jurassic Park.
Such an odd choice to go with the sequel. Because, don't get me wrong, I like that movie. Not as good as the first movie. That's my initial thought pattern here. Weird, serious role for Vince Vaughn. But yeah, okay. Lost World. Okay, I'm in. Okay. Look, everyone's seen those movies a billion times. We can definitely do those out of order.
And this is why I thought it would be okay, right? If you haven't seen Jurassic Park,
Well,
then
stop. If you haven't seen Jurassic Park, stop this podcast right now and go watch Jurassic Park, please. That's step one of watching this podcast furthermore.
yeah. But honestly, look, The Lost World, I think it's great. So I really hope that people enjoy the ride for The Lost World. I believe in Australia it's on Binge, but otherwise, I'm not sure where else you might be able to find it. You might have to do what I did for The Fifth Element and really, purchase that thing. Which, look, in the case of The Lost World, I don't think you'll be disappointed if you did go down that route,
It is on Binge. It is on Paramount. It is on Prime. So there are plenty of places to watch.
There you go. All right. Look, Ben, why don't you tell us where the good listeners or viewers, perhaps, if you are watching this on YouTube, can find our magical product?
You can listen to us on Spotify and Apple, iTunes, Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. It's a quick little search. You can also find us on the YouTubes, Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. If you want to follow us on social media, we are currently active on Instagram, Jim_and_Ben, and TikTok under @Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. Please give all those items a look. Give them a like, give them a follow, comment, subscribe, all those things. Also, we've in our little world have noticed a really kind of encouraging uptick in people interacting with our content. I'm going to say mostly positive. Definitely it's the internet. There is some negative, and you know who you are. Here's the deal. The negative stuff doesn't affect us. Comments are comments. Keep it coming. If it's truly offensive, we will delete it. But otherwise, this is Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. Why don't you come on an adventure with us next week with Jurassic Park: The Lost World?